We can now bring in Aaron Zelin, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today. Why is Israel conducting these strikes to protect the Druze minority in Syria?
In many ways, the Israelis want the country not to be whole again. They want it to be weak so that Israel feels as if its security is okay on the border. However, with a weakened state, actually, the new Syrian government is unable to deal with security concerns, especially related to former regime officials or Iran or Hezbollah or ISIS, and therefore it's complicating matters in many respects.
Does Israel have any long-term goal with these strikes? Doesn't it risk the security of the Druze community inside Syria?
Yes, I actually was recently in Syria and was in Sweden talking to a number of Druze, including leaders there, and they worry that Israel's continued actions will make it as if their community is a fifth column, which they do not want. They want to de-escalate the sectarian rhetoric and actually want to just be viewed as Syrians, even if they are Druze as well.
So, what I'm just trying to get behind Israel's actions here because I know Israel has a Druze minority that actually serves in the army and does all these things. Has the Druze minority in Israel asked Israeli officials to help the minority over in Syria, or is the government acting on its own behalf?
There's definitely pressure from the Israeli Druze community. However, they, of course, live in the safety of Israel and therefore not affected by any of the consequences of what could happen in Syria. And although it is true there is a minority constituency amongst the Syrian Druze that are pro-Israel insofar as they want them to help them out, most of the Druze want to be left alone and just try and rebuild the country after the fall of the regime.
You mentioned that you were recently in Syria. When you spoke to members of the Druze minority, what did they tell you about Syria's new leadership, which claims it wants an inclusive Syria?
I mean, many of them are still waiting and seeing how the process continues. Of course, the Druze have not demilitarized yet. A lot of it's based off of how they feel the new constitution will play out and guaranteeing their rights. But many of them are willing to engage the new government and just want to make sure that they can live in safety.
Have you spoken with any members of the Druze community since these Israeli strikes?
I have, yes.
And what did they tell you?
Many of them are skeptical and see it as a cynical ploy by the Israelis to advance their own interests. Because many of them are like, well, if you worried about us so much, where were you when Assad was in power? You didn't do anything to help us out when we were being attacked by ISIS, 10 years ago and things along those lines. And so there's a lot of skepticism within the community. But at the same time, they still are worried about what could happen in the future to their own community as well.
Are you surprised at the lack of international reaction to Israel's strikes to defend the Druze minority in Syria and how that risks inflaming the situation?
Well, I think it's a continuation of what we've seen over the last, year and a half or so, where the international community has been relatively quiet with a lot of Israeli actions in the region. However, I think it's also important to contextualize that there's a much bigger difference between what they are doing in, say, Gaza and Lebanon against Hamas and Hezbollah, two groups that are actively trying to kill Israelis and destroy the state, whereas the current Syrian government has been calling for a continuation of the 1974 border agreement and have, discussed on and off the record that under certain conditions, they'd be willing to actually have peace with Israel. And so it's kind of surprising in some ways that we're seeing that Israel's not trying to take advantage of this new opportunity to further undermine the Iranian and Hezbollah networks, which both the Syrian government and the Israelis dislike.
Aaron, you said that Israel wants Syria to be weak, but I'm just trying to get behind the Israeli leadership here. Why would they want to destabilize Syria even further, given that that could turn out to be a risk for them?
It's a good question. I personally do not understand this strategy. I think it would be much better for them to engage the new government, since the new government could work with them on security concerns of mutual interest. But it seems that they worry that if it's a centralized and secure state, that could lead to more influence of Turkey. And so some of this is related to their own fears about Turkish influence in Syria, even though the Turks and what they're doing in Syria is mainly due to their own domestic political concerns related to them wanting the 3 to 4 million Syrian refugees to return to Syria. And so they want stability. And then, of course, they don't want the Kurds to control parts of their northern border anymore. And that's why they, alongside the U.S., has been pushing for the SDF and the new government to work together in the fight against ISIS. And so a lot of Turkey's actions are more related to their own domestic concerns.
I thought it was interesting in the package we played before coming to you, where we had a soundbite of a Lebanese Druze leader who essentially was opposed to Israel's intervention in Syria, and said they want to entangle the Druze in Lebanon and Syria in an endless war against Muslims. Do you feel that this is the thinking among most of the Druze community in the Middle East?
Well, I think the key thing is when we talk about quote unquote the Druze, there isn't like one opinion. Of course, there's a variety of opinions. I can't speak to the Lebanese Druze, but I do know that within Syria itself, like I said, there's a minority of folks that are against the government and want to, work closely with Israel. Then you sort of have this medium group of people where they're waiting and seeing what's going to happen, but they're kind of neutral with what's going on. And then you also have another group that wants to engage with the new government and be integrated into the new Syrian state. And so when people talk about the Druze, quote unquote, we have to understand that it's a nuanced issue and that there isn't like one position of the community.
Interesting point. Aaron, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us on the program today, Aaron Zelin there. Now,